And welcome back to the final touches of Andromeda. Month 4, working on the fans, adding the template pieces that we cut out to our completed fan. So you should have your templates cut out and make sure that you marked your TRP lines. So on the smaller ones, there's 4 TRP lines. On the bigger ones, there's 3. And so the way that I did this is when I had them all stacked up, I kept the paper on, ran them through my machine without thread so that I had the holes. Then I actually took a heat erasable pen and marked over those holes on each one. And then I put the stitches in. I didn't put stitches into the center of the curve because I'm gonna go ahead and use that now, but because I used a heat pen, I wanted to make sure that the other ones were in so that when I ironed this open, I didn't erase my TRP lines. If you're not gonna iron them, a marker like that works great. So you can do it different ways. You can also use just a chalk pen to be able to put that on there that's non-erasable. It's a wash off, and then you don't have to stitch them. If you want to mark that off later, it's really however you want to do it. But that's kind of was fast and easy for me to do. So the way that we do these is going to be slightly different than how we did the veins. So what we're going to do is you're going to take your finished fan piece. I have my TRP line down the center of my vein, and then I have my TRP line on my template. The nice thing is that all of your fans are exactly the same, so it does not matter which one goes with which template, okay? So I'll show you how to do one of the small ones and one of the big ones. They're essentially the same, you just have more material on the big ones. So what I'm going to do is I have them both right sides up now. And so I'm gonna match those TRP lines, and I'm gonna take my template piece and I'm gonna flip it over wrong side up, and I'm gonna match those TRP lines, not only that point, but I'm gonna make sure that they follow each other and that they follow each other all the way down. And then I'm gonna throw a pin in here. And now you can see that I have this template going the opposite direction. And what we need is this template piece to match the curve of our fan piece. So what I'm going to do is I'm gonna take this side and I'm going to match it with the edge of my fan, and I'm going to throw a pin in there. Okay, and then I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. And this is going to start forcing this curve to go the other way. Throw a pin in that to hold that steady. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to gather up all of this fabric, and when I do that, it forces the curve the other direction. So if I take a template piece and I start gathering this up, you can see that now, because I've gathered this up, it's forcing that curve to go the opposite direction, which is what we want so that it matches our curve of our vein. And it does take a little bit of finagling and finesse to get that to match that curve, but you're just going to gather fabric and get it to where it matches that curve. Now you can do 2 different things here. And the easiest thing for me is to throw some pins in it. And I'm going to use a bunch of pins, okay? I'm gonna throw a pin in here about every inch around this curve to make sure that it stays in place as I stitch it. Making sure that my raw edges stay lined up. And as I go around, I've kind of got it started, but then as I go around, I'm going to make sure that that curve matches. And so whatever is your dominant hand, that's probably what you're going to pin with. And then the other hand is what's going to gather that fabric. Okay. And so I'm just going to work my way around that curve, gathering the fabric so that it will lay nice and flat against that vein. The other way that you can do this, if you don't want to use pins, is you can put the same glue that we used on the vein, those glue sticks, not the repositional glue, but a regular glue stick that's made for fabrics. And you can put some on that vein at the top of the curve and then work this around and press it down. You still want to probably use pins at your TRP lines and at your ends to keep that in place. I did do that on one of mine, but I wasn't real happy with it because I didn't feel like it stayed well enough and stuck well enough along that curve, because this is pulling a lot of tension when you do this, and I didn't feel like the glue really held it well enough. So I prefer the pins on this particular one. It worked great for the vein, but I'm liking the pins better. Do what works for you. It's fine to have different techniques when you do this. So that's what it's gonna look like. It's all bunched up right here. That is okay. That's gonna iron out. You're not sewing, like when you stitch your 1/4 inch seam allowance, you're not gonna have those pleats in there. That is just below that 1/4 inch line. So now if I take one of my larger templates, okay, we're gonna do the same thing. Okay, so I have it lined up here, but I'm gonna flip my template piece over and match that TRP line to the TRP line that's on my fan. And because I don't have mine stitched, I just have mine with pen mark, then I flip it over to make sure that I am lined up. Once I have that lined up, I'm gonna throw a pin in it to keep it lined up. And then again, I'm gonna do the same thing. I'm gonna start by turning one side to the edge of my vein. And this just makes a straight line. So this is part of that smart corner system, but it just ends up a straight line. So you don't have to try to match 1/4 inch or anything like that. It's really just going to be lining up those edges. Okay, now when I do this one, I just have more fabric. And so I just have to bunch more fabric in order to get it to lay out. And you kind of have to bunch a little bit at a time. You can't just grab one big chunk and have it fold out. It's like a fan, and you're gonna have to do little bunches, little folds to all the way across to get that to lay out across that whole curve. And so then again, I'm gonna put a pin in it at about every inch in order to get that to lay nice and flat and keep those, that curve going. It's kind of like when you make a curve from straight lines, you have to have a lot of straight lines close together to make that curve. So that's essentially what we're doing with these pins, is I'm forcing it to make that curve with a lot of short lines. And then that also is going to help you get that fabric even all the way from the edge to the middle, because we kind of get to split it in half with that TRP line. And then so then on the other side, again, I'm going to take all this fabric and I'm going to gather it up and force it into that curve. Okay, and then again, starting to pin, making sure that you grab both layers. And that, remember, that vein does not have any paper on it. We cut that paper off. So the good news about that is that when you go to sew this, you do not have to do a smaller stitch. You can do your regular stitch. So if you've just done your TRP lines, those should be a basting stitch. So they're going to be a little bit longer. Make sure that you bring it back to your regular stitch length, your default stitch length, or whatever you normally stitch your seams at, before you stitch this seam together. Okay. Now, when I go to sew these, so it's going to take, number one, it's going to take time to get all 16 of these pinned. If it works better for you to do a few, stitch it so that you get kind of a break and then come back, pin a few more, do it again, that's fine. If you want to pin all of them and then just be able to sew all of them, whatever works for you. Like, it does not matter how you want to go about that. It does take a lot of pins. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 pins in this. So for 16 of them, that's a lot of pins. So maybe you run out of pins, stitch them up, pull your pins, do the next batch. Doesn't really matter. But when I stitch this, this side is going to be up. I'm going to use my 1/4 inch foot so that I can stitch 1/4 inch along this curve. I'm not following paper because I don't have paper to follow, but I like to keep this bunched up so that it doesn't pull too much on those pins and get wonky. Now, if you pull too much, it's gonna fold it up, and you don't wanna do that. You wanna have it bunched just enough that it lays nice and flat so that you can stitch that seam, making sure that within that 1/4 inch, it's nice and flat and you don't have a fold or a pleat in that 1/4 inch seam. So you're gonna throw this under your machine and stitch that 1/4 inch, okay? Then when you get done, you are going to, so you can see I've got 1/4 inch seam along here. You're gonna iron it out towards the template, okay? So it goes to the vein, to the template. And what I had to do when I ironed this out is you actually hold this template piece up and do a little bit at a time, making sure that that goes up, and I just run my iron like this. And then as I go around, I hold up the next section so that it points that towards the template. So you can see that I have this one all done. I pulled, so you can see my TRP line here. You can pull that TRP line. If you have a stitch in the template, you can pull that template. Mine just disappeared because I had that iron off pin on there, but you can pull the, where'd my ripper go? You can pull that TRP line from that vein, and if you haven't pulled it off the fan piece, you can pull it off of that as well. Then you should have TRP lines on the remainder of your template piece for whatever that is. But you can see now I have this template piece on. This side is lined up. This side is lined up. and I don't have any pleats or wrinkles in my vein or in my template. Okay, so that's what we want. If you end up with a little tiny wrinkle or a little tiny pleat, you're probably going to be able to, that's going to disappear when it gets quilted. If you've got major ones or lots of them, you're going to want to go back, rip that out, try again, and even out those pleats. Make sure that you're not pulling on those fabrics when you're doing it. When I'm putting this on, I don't want to really pull on this because you're going to distort this curve, and then that's where you're going to end up with those pleats. I'm really gently pulling the fabric together to make that curve on its own without stretching and yanking that fabric. It does fit. You just have to finagle it a little bit. You can go ahead and pull papers from Unit C1 at this time. If you've never pulled papers before off of one of these quilts, the best thing that you can do is, number one, have your short stitch, okay? And then when I always start on one side, but you can kind of pull those fabrics against the bias, and it'll actually pop out of those seams for part of it, and it makes it easier to pull up. You can use tweezers to get some of these little teeny tiny pieces. But then I just work from one side to the other, and be careful not to pop your stitches out of your edges. We definitely don't want to pop those stitches out. You can also fold and run your finger along, and then that'll come out nice and easy. The hardest ones are these little teeny tiny pieces within these seams that are these little triangles. And again, you can use a little stylus or something to pull those up, and some tweezers to get those pulled out. If you have a little bit of paper left, it is not the end of the world. You're not gonna feel that when you quilt your quilt. And then if you wash it, those will dissolve out. So if you've got a little bit of paper left, that's fine. You just don't want huge chunks. So I just work one side to the other, because the bigger seam that you have undone, then it makes it easier to get that paper off. And then these little edges, seam allowance edges, will come off once you have the big ones done. I don't like to do the little seam allowance ones first, because they tend to rip more if you don't have the bigger ones off in the meantime. And then you can kind of grab those bigger ones and come off in bigger chunks, like so. It does take time to pull all the paper off. Sometimes with some of them, you don't pull the paper till the end. She has started in her more recent ones to have you pull paper after each step, so that it's not quite so bulky to put it all together. And then it also decreases the tediousness of pulling all the paper off of a queen or king size quilt all at once. So stick a movie on, pull your paper off, it's fine. So get all these together and then pull your paper off. But I hope that helps you put the template pieces on. And then in May, we are going to start putting the pieces that we have together. So that'll be a lot of fun. We'll get the center of the quilt done. Hopefully May is not too crazy for me. My kids have a lot of stuff coming up. It's towards the end of the school year, so there's lots of activities and things, but I will try to get some videos up to show you how to get the center of your Andromeda put together. So happy sewing, and we will see you again soon.